Well, good morning, everybody. As we start off today's video, I want to focus on some of the bigger things that are affecting our near-term weather, including the increased risk of tropical system developing over the Lesser Antilles later on this week. This morning, the latest update from the National Hurricane Center has given us a 50% chance of developing. And this is this system we've been keeping an eye on that's going to kind of ride the southern edge of the Bermuda High, which again has been quite strong. Seems as though the steering currents for this give us a couple of possibilities. Most of the model ensemble members want to take this closer to the southeast coast, but we have watched a few of the different forecast models want to take this into parts of the Gulf of Mexico. So it just looks as over the next week we're going to watch where the system forms somewhere here, kind of on the very northern edge of the Lesser Antilles, and then we'll have to pay attention how it rides either through the Greater Antilles or over the Bahamas to see where this is going to go. So that'll be an important piece of this. Just to show you that ensemble spread, this is the latest update from the European model. Just looking at the kind of the track, the potential track of this system. It's not yet named. It's not yet even classified as a tropical depression. It has yet to form, but you can see where the model is putting down the risk of having tropical low pressure form in the next 10 days here. So we'll get more on that in just a few seconds. But first, I want to show you the kind of the risk for today. We have a broad area in the middle section of the country that has excessive heat watches and advisories. Along its periphery, we're going to watch for some thunderstorms. And to the west, it's another day of kind of excessive wildfire smoke. But coming back to this heat that's in the central United States, today's high temperatures, according to the National Digital Forecast Database, we're going to have another day here of temperatures well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. We're pushing 90 over towards St. Louis. We'll have 90s, deep in the 90s up toward Rapid City, and this will flow all the way back down here into Mexico. Tomorrow looks to be an even hotter day, possibly central Kansas hitting 108 degrees Fahrenheit with past 100 degrees throughout most of Nebraska into South Dakota, parts of Iowa, Missouri as well. But there's some change in this pattern that's coming beyond this. And so this heat wave that we're enduring this week, here's Wednesday's highs, getting into Thursday and Friday, there starts to be a deeper trough that develops in the eastern half of North America that needs to be paid attention to, and that'll kind of give us a change in the signal for the temperatures later on this week. But for most of this week, it's going to be very hot in the central part of the United States. Now, running around the periphery of that heat is going to be multiple clusters of storms, and there's that track we tried to identify over the last week and a half or so as to where we'd be seeing this end of July, beginning of August kind of storminess. And the newest European model is showing that that's the track over which we expect to see repeated rounds of storms, and I'm concerned this week about some of those storms being severe. As we talked about last week, there's going to be this line, and maybe it's here now, that if you are to the west of that line and to the south and west of that line where the heat is, this is going to be a flash drought scenario building in the central part of the United States, while we could get very heavy rains out of the storms that move through parts of the Missouri Valley to the Mississippi Valley into the Ohio Valley and hit some pretty dry areas actually in the Ohio Valley right now. So if you just take a look at this map, it shows you the last 14 days of precipitation as a percent of normal. Some of the areas that are going to be seeing some relief from this are kind of in through this corridor. So parts of Indiana and Ohio, maybe Kentucky, a little bit of Tennessee, getting some decent moisture out of this, possibly getting some of this into Pennsylvania as well. But I'm concerned about the Red River Valley of the South, parts of central and eastern Kansas, sections of Missouri, parts of Nebraska, and South Dakota. If we do not get the ridge to really just return back to the west, this area is going to continue to get drier. Right now, we're watching a pretty intense line of storms that are moving through parts of Missouri and Illinois. Just looking at some lightning flash data this morning, we can see here quite a bit of strikes. And I'll be leaving here in a little bit. I live right around Champaign-Urbana, heading up toward way up into Chicago. Where am I going today? Woodstock, Illinois, to give a talk to a group of Brazilian growers. And so tomorrow in that video, I'm going to share with you what I share with them today. So if you're curious about this upcoming growing season for South America, we're going to hit that tomorrow, part of that forecast tomorrow in my video. But this is where the storms are this morning, so I'm kind of hoping I can get out and see them as I drive forward. But it's on its leading edge, producing some pretty gusty winds. Some of the winds here getting 40 to 50 miles an hour. Now, as these storms came out of Iowa into Illinois this morning, they've had a history of producing some locally heavy rain. But before I get to that, here's the weekend rainfall totals. We had storms that kind of moved from south to north right through the gut of the Mississippi, spreading rain throughout parts of the Mid-South and the Southeast, and again along the Gulf Coast here. But these storms now coming out of the north and west, and just taking a look at how much rain they've been producing, we can see that locally over 2 inches of rain have come out of these storms. And so they're capable of dropping quite a bit of rainfall early this morning. The one last thing I kind of want to hit on here is as we watch the satellite give us a view this morning as the sun rises, there's a low that moved up the east coast, as you can see yesterday. Here's the storms this morning. But if I take you back and show you last night, we can see again another day of pretty prolific wildfire smoke throughout the western United States as we continue to see very large fires burning in this area. If we take just a close look at what was going on there as sun sets, you can see large fires in Oregon, California, the smoke spreading in Nevada, throughout the Snake River Valley, and throughout most of the sky here in Montana. What has changed, though, is the wildfires in Canada. Just take a look here at yesterday's satellite data. Remember, we put down, in some places, 2 to 3 inches of rain in this area, which thankfully helped extinguish some of those fires. So throughout the day on Sunday, while there's still wildfire smoke here, this is lingering from the previous wildfire events. Plus, this is some smoke from the western U.S., the fires in Alberta, thankfully, are out for the most part from what I can tell here based on satellite. There are still a few right in this area, very far northern Alberta and British Columbia, that are burning. You can see their smoke here from yesterday. But to show you the U.S. numbers, we're almost at 4 million acres burned through this point in the year. And compared to a year ago, it's about 4 times the number, but there were more fires. They were just smaller a year ago. How does this compare to the 10-year average? Well, it's a hair above that, about 500,000 acres above that 10-year average. But as you can see, as I kind of slide through this, there's 2014 all the way through 2024. The numbers they bounce around quite a bit. So we just have to take that into account when you look at these numbers overall. Okay, so wildfire smoke. The problem I'm worried about today is if you just take a look at this 48-hour forecast, you'll see that there's some strong winds flow out of the west that's going to be kind of spreading these fires and not necessarily doing anything to make the firefighting efforts any less. So a lot of the smoke that you see blowing here out of Washington, Oregon, California, spreading through the rest of the west into the upper Midwest northern plains. This is borne on some pretty strong winds out of the west we're expecting to see later on today. So it's not just an air quality issue. It's certainly going to be stronger winds making the firefight quite difficult. So that's kind of a rundown of the near-term stuff that I'm watching. Let's now dig a little bit deeper into a few of those pieces, and then we'll talk more about the longer range forecast I'm seeing for the month of August at the end. So let's get there. Other than seeing these winds in the west, take a look at where the Bermuda High is currently positioned. It's right here. And we've just been paying attention to its size and strength and the flow that it's pushed through the Caribbean, through the Gulf of Mexico, and how that flow has come around, into the southern part of the United States. And as we watch it, it's going to be the flow around this Bermuda High that's eventually going to get this right there, this weaker wave to possibly develop into something over the Lesser Antilles. So let's go ahead and have a look at the Bermuda High and try to assess how this might all play out. We're going to use the European model. We're at 850 millibars, so that's about a mile above the ocean surface. And we're looking at the wind field, and we're trying to see where it's putting down high and low pressure. So there's our large Bermuda High. And as we work through the day today, getting out into Tuesday and Wednesday, you start to see, here it is. It doesn't look like much, but that little trough in through there, that tropical low pressure, is expected to develop. Now, what will be, I think, the more challenging part of this forecast is the Bermuda High kind of has been going back and forth in its placement somewhere in this vicinity, kind of as I'm drawing here. And I think what's a bit unknown is where will the Bermuda High kind of push itself over, the next, 5 days or so. If we do get stronger pressure, higher pressure on its western side, then you can expect whatever forms here to maybe move more toward Florida and come into this side of the Gulf. If not, then it's going to possibly follow, I think this is the more probable track, somewhere kind of hugging the southeastern coast of the United States. And that's currently what the new European model is suggesting. Can you see the low developing here over the Bahamas? This would be this Friday night getting into Saturday and Sunday. And we have yet to know how deep this is going to be. The European model puts it at 1,005 millibar low, which means we would probably be talking about a tropical depression or a weaker tropical storm at this point. and it will likely be spreading its moisture right along the coast if the given track by the European model, is right. Notice how it's late in the time period that the Bermuda high pushes toward the southeast coast. Had it got there earlier, this would have shoved this farther to the south. So we look at the ensemble tracks of where there could be tropical low pressure. This is using a great site called weathernerds.org. And we can see where the European ensemble is placing that lower pressure. And overall, as you look at it, most of the ensemble members, as I stop it here, are keeping this out, hugging the periphery of the Bermuda high, right in this area. But there's still a possibility that we have to pay attention to all week, that this could get over Florida and into this part of the Gulf of Mexico. So that's about all we know at this point about where this could potentially go. Let's just watch it. It'll be a week of keeping a close eye on this. Okay, I do want to show you, though, the European ensemble probability maps. I think these are instructive to kind of add to those tropical cyclone tracks, just to show you that the highest probability based on the current European ensemble forecast is to keep this, hugging the southeast coast. In fact, if we took the European model at its kind of core here, it's really keeping the low away from the southeastern United States. But all week long, the position of the Bermuda high, if it intrudes in on this area, that will be a key indicator as to where this might possibly go. Now, we know that the ocean temperatures in this area are still very, very warm. We have a very, very positive, it's 4 standard deviations above the mean, Atlantic meridional mode. So that's part of what will help this hurricane season likely generate many storm systems across this very warm ocean here. It also helps that La Nina is trying to make a surge, and we'll have more conversation about La Nina this week, given that the ocean temperatures are beginning to cool off somewhat here and the trade winds are going. So more on La Nina to come this week. But when I think about these ocean temperatures, it takes me to some of the work by Dr. Kerry Emanuel. And what he does here is, because hurricane strength is directly tied to ocean temperatures, it's a direct correlation, we can make a guess at the potential for the minimum central pressure or maximum winds based off ocean temperatures. And what this means is, if everything else is conducive to development, like low wind shear and no dust, a good humid environment, then the potential minimum pressure can be conveyed here, and then the maximum potential winds here, meaning that the ocean temperatures are primed for making Cat 4 and Cat 5 hurricanes in this area, should all the other ingredients come together. But the other ingredients are just as important as ocean temperatures. So this is not about hype. This is just to say, hey, one of the ingredients is right. So we have to look at things like wind shear. And I know it's kind of a busy map here, but where I've stopped you in this is on Thursday morning, when if there is a low, it'll be somewhere in this vicinity. And what we do here is we look for, if it's going to go off in this direction, let's just kind of draw a couple of lines there. Is there anything out ahead of it, brightly colored like this, that could disrupt potential development? And at this point, I don't see a highly sheared environment ahead of this. So if it does develop, it will have a pretty conducive environment to develop. But it's got to get through its own kind of surrounding shear, which is common, but just to make a point here that it's not as though this is going to run into a wall of wind shear. What it is going to run into, though, is what we think will be a trough that sneaks through the southeast, keeping this out over open ocean, which you'll see in a few moments. The other side of this is going to be, is it kind of chewing on any dust? And so by Wednesday, okay, we're out here again, possibly something living in here. You can see that on its northern side, there could be quite a bit of Saharan dust at play. And as it works its way toward the coast, it'll just be important to watch how that dust gets ingested into the storm and if it has any sort of a negative impact on its environment. The humidity will be another major factor for this. How dry is the air in which this is going to be kind of getting into? And I want to wait a little bit later in the week to see what that humidity profile looks like. You do notice this, as we get out there, this is Saturday, there is something right in through here. Can you see how the dust is kind of tracing out some sort of a frontal boundary? That'll be something to be talked about as we try to figure out where this is going to go. Okay, one last thing about the hurricane season. Right now, over the next several days, you see this. And this is what we've been monitoring for the last couple of weeks as being this time period over which we're taking the lid off of the atmosphere, both in the East Pacific and in the Western Atlantic. So that sits right on top of that area. But some of the longer range models are now putting down over the next 15 days to the middle of the month, a bit more suppression in this area. Now, this doesn't shut off the hurricane season, but it's kind of a point in the wrong direction, if that makes any sense. We would expect a more active hurricane season if we had the blue-green colors coming back over this area. So it just tells us that, as every hurricane season does, it kind of comes in ebbs and flows, right? So you get conducive environments and a lot of systems spin up, and then it backs off a bit because of a repositioning of global convection, and it just does that. And it'll do it for the next 90 days. We are just at the beginning of the hurricane season now. So where that brings me to is the pattern. And I want to show you what we're expecting by tonight. This is our lead shortwave that we're going to be watching initiate the risk of severe storms in this area. This is flowing around this ridge. But there is a broader trough that starts in Canada, starts in Alaska here, and then runs down the west coast of the United States. And that's what's knocked back the excessive heat here and planted it in the midsection of the country. Here's the low that's moving through parts of the Northeast. We watched it yesterday come right up the coast. All right, as we go into Tuesday and Wednesday, what will happen all week is little shortwaves like this one will run around the periphery of this ridge. And that's what's going to give us the increased risk of these storms throughout this week all along the path, starting in Montana, coming right in through this corridor for strong storms. So for example, on Thursday afternoon, the trough is sitting somewhere in through here. It'll be the leading edge of which we're going to keep an eye out for strong to severe storms. By Friday into Saturday, the ridge opens back up throughout the Great Basin, kind of along the spine of the Rocky Mountains. And this is this broader low that we're keeping an eye on. So remember I mentioned a moment ago, when this system, there it is, that's the artificial intelligence location of it, gets here, there's a broader trough kind of sitting in this area that could help guide this out to open ocean. See it? And that little push right in through there is what may help take this and keep it out to ocean while the Bermuda High sits and spins in this area down near the surface. So this is where we are by Monday. And into Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, this is that transition that we saw in the forecast last week that suggests bringing any sort of sustained, when I say the word sustained, I'm talking about 10 plus days of excessive heat. This is the thing that's going to be difficult to maintain here. It appears as though we're going to stay hot, but I'm talking 100-degree heat sticking around for a long time in this area is pretty limited because the pattern is doing this. And it's got this deeper trough over the, over the Hudson Bay. And that's not the right scenario to keep heat throughout a big section of the central U.S. ag belt over toward the Great Lakes. And the European model and its artificial intelligence and also in its ensemble has seen something like this for a while. Now, what this does tell me is that we're going to have to keep a close eye on how this increases the risk of storminess through this corridor as we go forward into this forecast pattern here. So let's take a look at the risk today. Let's see if SPC's updated this. They have not. This is their outlook for today on the risk of severe storms. So in the northern plains, the Dakotas, and Nebraska. And then we've already seen the storms coming through Illinois this morning, but we're going to watch this section of the Ohio River Valley tonight. Tomorrow, again, it'll be the same corridor. And then getting into, July 31st, once again, this part of South Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa. And I think all week long we'll continue to have a discussion about this region. So I want to show it to you in the high-res NAM. Let's blow that up once. This was the model initialization for 7 o'clock. So what I want to show you is the model was late. It had initialized such that the storms were only going to be here, and they've already made it through central Illinois. So a little bit of I'd say it's a bit off on its initialization. I guess that's the way to look at it. But the model later on today, so this is this afternoon and this evening, is firing up another storm system here late this afternoon and this evening and getting into the overnight hours. And there's the potential for a squall line to develop maybe in southern Illinois, southern Indiana, getting into parts of Kentucky. And this is the area that we're concerned about the risk for the straight line winds. Outside of that, as we get into the evening hours, let me back you up here. Isolated storms throughout the northern plains. Look at the wet weather coming into the northwest as the trough is digging in here. There's stronger winds with this, but there is the chance for showers and storms with this as well, which could be good for the firefight. But the problem is a lot of times this time of year, storms put down their lightning, but don't put down enough rain to put out fires, and that's what our concern is. Scattered storms up the East Coast. Let's get into the day on Tuesday. You'll see here Tuesday afternoon and evening where are the storms firing up again. They're just following the periphery of that ridge. So they're isolated here, more organized into squall lines there, and they're pushing into the southeast. And you can even see the model here on Tuesday night, putting down storms into Georgia and South Carolina as well. And the Northeast stays stormy in this pattern too. Now let's get into the day on Wednesday. It's a large complex of storms rolling through, coming through the eastern Corn Belt. If we look at it in terms of what artificial intelligence is grabbing, you can see that's what it's putting the potential tropical system. Here's the corridor that opens up stormy, flow coming into the northwest. But as I've been worried about, if we flip this over to the NBM, if you're kind of to the west of where I'm drawing here, the heat is on, but the dryness is going to make this a flash drought scenario. That is the WPC forecast. Here is the, that's the NBM forecast, the National Blend of Models. This is the WPC. And here's the newest European model forecast and the newest GFS. And there's quite a bit of difference between the European and the GFS despite similar placement. If we compare the models, you'll note how much wetter the GFS is over the Great Lakes states, while the European model is much wetter through this whole corridor of the kind of the I states getting over into Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York. Important differences there, I think, in the pattern of this precipitation. So let's go ahead and compare the two and just have a look. GFS left, European right. As I play it through Monday into Tuesday, you can see those clusters of storms moving through this part of the Corn Belt here. This again is on Thursday or Wednesday night, Thursday morning, getting out there through Thursday during the day and into Friday. So multiple days of showers and storms in this area. By the time we get into the weekend, that'll be when we're paying close attention to the tropical system. Note the difference between the European and the GFS. GFS doesn't really have much here, but we'll see what develops, because the European has taken that right along the East Coast here after this weekend into early next week. Now beyond that, what will be important to watch next week is how deep does this trough get, where does its southern edge extend, and where do we get storms around its edge? And so let's go have a better look at that by going to the European ensemble. 10-day outlook for total precip greater than an inch, pretty high through this corridor. And that's going to be critical. I mean, just take a look. This is going to be putting down some rain in an area that the top 16 inches is dry. But you notice that line I kept drawing, this is an area that's gone over hotter and drier for a while now. And we can see that getting into this section of Kansas and Nebraska, very, very dry conditions. You can see how this extends into the northern plains into Montana. And take a look at parts of the Northwest. This is a highly productive region in parts of Oregon and Washington, and it's got very, very dry soils. Now, a lot of stuff in here is irrigated, but we have to keep an eye on the dryness here as well. Coming back to this, let's now bump this up to 2 inches. I should have had a new model run in. There it is. So let's go back to the previous so we can look out farther. That's the probability of 2 inches. And if we look for some really heavy corridors, doesn't seem like we have them throughout the U.S. right now. So 2 inches there, 1 inch is here. Who's on the drier side? This is the probability of staying under a ½ inch. And the really dry side, probability of staying under a 1/10. So there's that line we continue to draw that's got the heat and the dryness. So overall, where's July taking us? This is our precip stats. Remember, the wet corridor you see through here was primarily from Beryl and the storms that have followed it. But I think this is a good map to kind of show you after showing you where the precip's coming through. And since we started off this video talking about heat, I just want to make a point. The heat that is coming into the central U.S. today, we've been very limited on seeing that throughout the month of July. Most of the heat's been in the west, where we're still, look at all these ones. These would be areas having their warmest Julys on record to this point. So if we take a look at where the temperatures are, again, the west is cooling down. We can see today temperatures in the low 90s in the Central Valley of California. Tomorrow is the extremely hot one in the Central Plains, again on the day on Wednesday, getting out there to Thursday and Friday. Notice where the heat's returning. It's back into the northern plains, Montana, the Pacific Northwest. And getting into our weekend, that's where the heat seems to stay anchored, is back into the west. So the new day 5 through 10 shows how much deeper that low is going to be here and the cooler weather that surrounds it, opening up a ridge that's going to snake, I think, up into western Canada, taking with it quite a bit of heat. That's still there once you get out to day 10 through 15. And this is that cool down that I mentioned earlier. that if you had asked me 2 weeks ago if I was expecting this, I would have said no. Only way I would have expected this is if persistence would have come back. And I wasn't predicting that 2 weeks ago. I thought we'd see more warmth, more heat in August in this area. But the GFS and the European look quite similar. There's the next 5 days in the European, but this is day 5 through 10. And day 10 through 15 shows that cool down taking place here while the heat stays across much of the western part of North America. All right, where do we finish this? Well, I'm going to show you the next 15 days all summarized into one map. And what we've got out of this is broader troughing developing here, ridges returning to this section of North America. And if that's the case, that puts this pattern kind of on repeat. It also keeps much of this section of Europe very stormy, including more risk of storms over France, which you probably saw in the opening ceremonies and the weekends here, the events this weekend, how wet it was in parts of France, especially around Paris. We'll talk more about what this is going to do to this section of, the Russian rebuild in Ukraine in just a second. But the pattern I'm saying is coming back is this. Since the beginning of July, the atmosphere has favored ridging here in some form of troughing in this area. And the wave pattern has been setting itself up where there's been ridging here and Bermuda High there. Now, you know that 2 weeks ago I said, I really think this is going to change in a way that we start to plant a ridge in this area, and then we broke all that down last week. And the newest kind of updates kind of continue that thought. I think the reason for it is we've seen so much warm water show up here, and this strong warm signal has been spread out a bit more. See how it's kind of coming up to the west coast? This is still very much in place. But as a result of that warm water edging its way toward the west coast, I think it makes more sense just to come back to the way that the Climate Prediction Center has been seeing this all along, with the suggestion of the greatest heat being anchored throughout the western side of the United States. This is their new mid-August outlook for temperatures and precipitation. I would just be cautious of this being drier. And what I mean by that is if we do end up pulling that ridge back into this area, we start our storm clusters through the northern plains first before they get into the southeast. The midsection of the country, then into the southeast. The southeast likely stays wet due to the Bermuda High maintaining its position in that section of the ocean here. We will get a new 1 month update. Let's see here. It'll come out on the 31st. So we'll look forward to seeing that at the end of the week here, or the middle of the week here. But this brings me back to the ECMWF. And as we start to wrap up this video, over that hot ocean, we can now see the Pacific High being split into two different pieces. Now, do you see this? Take a look. If I go back to, this map, it's been here and here with a trough in between. And the new forecast says higher than normal pressure here and here with the trough in between. And what that suggests is we give a better chance for this trough to live, and the Bermuda High stays strong on its northern side. Low pressure begins to form here with the active hurricane season. And if we zip into the United States, our precipitation pattern looks something like this. And what we've got here is ridging in this area, storm clusters running the periphery, better chances of those storms in this area. But I still think we get storms that dive into this area once we get farther into August and see where the ridge rebuilds in the west. It is not a good scenario for the west. It's more repeated heat, high evaporation rates, and fire risk in the west. But the placement of that ridge is going to be critical going forward. So that brings me to my last couple of things. The temperature forecast over the next 10 days looks something like this globally. Notice how warm it is in South America, by the way. So this is some late winter warmth that's coming through parts of South America. On the precip side of things, look at the stormy corridor right through this part of France. And better chances of storms in parts of Russia. But where the NDVI values are the lowest are to the south of this, in parts of eastern Ukraine, in western Russia and southern Russia. The remnants of the typhoon are still going through the Manchurian Plain and North China Plain, adding a lot of rain, and the Indian monsoon has made a huge surge to the north, hitting a large area here with very, very wet conditions. A deep trough of low pressure has kind of lived in this area, which has been really dragging fronts through Western Australia, helping revive months-long drought in that particular area as they work their way towards spring. But as I said, tomorrow, one of the big pieces we're going to focus on is South America, trying to see when we're expecting the dry season to end and how the precipitation patterns may set up. Because 1 year ago, when we were having a discussion about El Nino, it was all about the delay in the monsoonal rains. And this year, we're going to have to see what's kind of playing out there. So I'll bring that up tomorrow and throughout the rest of the week. But that's all I got for you this Monday morning. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk tomorrow. Thanks.